Thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm Don Brown, running for U.S. Senate. This is the 65th county we've been in. We're honored to be here. I love the hospitality, and clearly y'all got it going. A lot of vitality here. May come over again. What is this, a once a month type thing, is it?
Right.
Once a month, get me a sausage biscuit and go from there. I'm Don Brown, running for the United States Senate, and in every 65 counties, all my 65 counties, I've always asked for a psychiatric referral. Why am I doing this, But no, we haven't had anybody to give me one yet. I'm an ex-U.S. Navy JAG officer, served in the Navy 16 years altogether, 5 active and 11 in the reserves, and entered the race. And also, I'm an author, written a few books. Y'all can look me up online. I don't want to waste your time with that. Jumped in the race in February, right after Andy Nilsson was in the race. Andy and I were in the race together for a while. We became friends. Then Mike jumped in the race. Mike Watley, I think his name is, jumped in the race. Andy left the race, and here we are. So we're continuing to have fun. I want to touch on about 3 topics that are in the news because I know everybody's watching their watches. We've heard the government shutdown mentioned a few times. Y'all remember that, right? So you might wonder, why would the federal government be shut down when we have a majority of Republicans in the United States Congress and also a Republican president? Well, it goes to a special rule they have in the U.S. Senate called Rule 27, which basically says you have to have 60 senators in order to bust the filibuster, stop it. And so what happened is the Democrats, even though our Republican members of Congress are content to keep the government open, and by the way, we're still spending way too much money, and I'll come to that just in a second, but the Democrats want to have SNAP benefits for illegals. And so here we are. Now, let's ask a question. Why would you pay SNAP benefits, in other words, food stamps, for illegals? This goes back to what the Democrats have been up to really since the Woodrow Wilson administration. But you see, I think there is a more fundamental question here that we got to stop and answer. Why is the federal government paying SNAP benefits to begin with? Our United States Constitution does not create a government which is a lollipop factory to give away goods and services. Not to give away Obama phones, not to give away even food stamps, although we have compassion for people. We're supposed to have a slimmed down federal government under our Constitution. That's what federalism is about. It's about slimming the federal government down to the point you just have the basic constitutional requirements, meaning a national defense, meaning federal courts from Article 3, and basically interstate commerce and the post office. And there are a couple of other ones in Article 1, Section 8. But the whole notion of what's happening to Washington has gone to hell in a handbasket. We had Reese here a moment ago. Our North Carolina General Assembly has been much more effective in its governing of the state of North Carolina than the United States Congress has been. And I'll tell you, Congress has basically abdicated its constitutional duties to this country. And I'll say that what we have here is this huge administrative deep state that has threatened our liberties. And it was created by the Democrats. I'll say this, the Democrats, when they have controlled Congress, have been absolutely disastrous. But our Republican Congresses have not been strong enough in reversing what they've done. I'll go back to 1913 when Woodrow Wilson was in office, and we made the greatest constitutional mistake, in my opinion, in history, and that was the passage of the 16th Amendment to authorize the income tax. Then there was the Income Tax Act on top of that. And then the Federal Reserve Act, all done under Democrat Woodrow Wilson and the Democrat Congress, who started this malarkey about the world must be made safe for democracy. And everybody said, we're a democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we never were a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Article 4, Section 4 of this Constitution will create for the states a republican form of government. James Madison, the principal author of the Constitution, said that a democracy is the most vile, V-I-L-E, form of government. I had to look that word up. It means really, really bad. John Adams, our second president, said the democracies eventually commit suicide. And Ben Franklin, I think, had the best line of all when he stepped out of the Constitutional Convention. A little old lady said, what are you giving us, Mr. Franklin? He said, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. But Ben Franklin also said that a democracy is like 2 wolves and a lamb meeting at high noon and voting on what they will have for lunch. That's what a democracy is. You want a democracy? Look at the George Floyd riots. You want a constitutional republic? Look at the peaceful civil rights movement which was done peaceably, in absolute opposite of what they did when they tore the country up in the George Floyd riots. So we got to ask some fundamental questions about what are we doing here? Why are we having a huge monolithic deep state with over 400 agencies we can count and 3.2 million federal employees while we're spending money like a bunch of drunken sailors? We've got to rethink what we're doing. I'm going to tell you, status quo republicanism is not going to change, not going to get it done. What do I mean by that? I said a moment ago, the Democrats have created it. It started with Woodrow Wilson redefining who we are. But you go into FDR and the New Deal. He creates this New Deal where the deep state explodes with this agency and that agency. The EPA, for example, has a bunch of regulations that farmers can't even take a mud puddle out of their own farm. I mean, it exploded under Franklin Roosevelt. Then comes Lyndon Johnson, 1965, with the Great Society, exploding it even more. And then comes Obamacare, which has nothing to do with the affordability of health care. They call it the Affordable Care Act. I call it the Astronomical Cost Act. All it was a takeover by the Democrats and the federal government into health care. Now, I say our Republican Congress has been weak. What do I mean by that? You remember when Trump comes in first time we have a chance to take out Obamacare? Remember this? Remember John McCain? We still have it. Look, we still have this monolithic deep state. President Trump has executed more effectively in the first 250 days or so of his administration than any president in our history. He comes in locked and loaded, ready to go. Listen, I worked on national election teams in 2020, including Sidney Powell, who's endorsed our campaign. If anybody believes Joe Biden got 80 million votes, I got some tropical landing illusions I'll sell you. It did not happen. Lord knew what he was doing, though. Even though that election was stolen, he puts Trump in now, and Trump has basically saved us right now from falling into tyranny. But he's going to be out of office in 2029, January 20th at high noon. And how are we going to gird ourselves for battle? The Republican Congress, Trump comes in and he uses executive orders to attack the Department of Education. What are you laughing about? Y'all caught that, didn't you? Y'all a quick group. Madam Chair, you got a quick group here. Here's the question. Why hasn't our Republican Congress taken out the Department of Education? We have got to hold their feet to the fire. We got to send warriors into the Senate and warriors into the Congress. They'll carry the flame there. And we'll make this argument. They just holding their heads down. And I can tell you one thing, if the Department of Education doesn't get taken out, it was rammed down our throats through Jimmy Carter in 1980, right before Reagan comes into office, and our test scores have dropped vis-a-vis against the Pacific Rim countries like Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea. They've dropped. It's done nothing. It's nothing but an indoctrination ploy. If the Congress doesn't take it out, because Congress put it in, if and when a Democrat or a rhino president comes into office, it's like zapping cancer with radiation and putting it in remission. It will come back with a furor. Our Republican Congress must get its act together, and we have to recognize what's happening here. So I will attack that problem. If there's one thing that Doge showed us, it is that the deep state of the federal government is a criminal enterprise. And if we're going to save our nation, first of all, we have to take where'd the vice chair go? The vice chair had to leave? Vice chair had to leave. Vice chair says we got to turn back to God, and we do. We got to go back to our Judeo-Christian roots, which is in our founding documents. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator, hear that part, with certain inalienable rights, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words. You know, Jesus Christ is also in the Constitution. The 7 Articles, 27 Amendments. At the execution line of the Constitution, it ends like this. Done by the unanimous consent, in convention, by the unanimous consent of the states present, this the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1787. Who do you think they're talking about when they say in the year of our Lord? Here's a little hint. It ain't Muhammad. It ain't Confucius. And it ain't Barack Obama. Jesus Christ is sandwiched in our founding documents. But we have got to go to war against this deep state. And we have got to take these agencies out or we're going to lose our country. And only the Congress can do that. A president cannot do that. What we've seen with Trump and Biden side by side is a quintessential example of the most ineffective, inept, corrupt, dumbest, foolish president in history who stole the election, juxtaposed against maybe the greatest president other than George Washington himself. Donald John Trump. And you can see foolishness versus effectiveness. But we got a thing called a 22nd Amendment in the Constitution. President Trump will be out of office, as I say. How will we gird ourselves for battle? We can't continue to send Republicans up to the Senate who are going to just continue to kick the can down the road. Let me move to a second topic in the news. Mondami. Mondami. The foolishness taking place in New York City is a reflection of two failed institutions that should have helped our country. And the first is the failure in education. You know, the Supreme Court took prayer out of schools. They took Jesus out of schools, but it's okay to put Muhammad in there, apparently. They taught our school system through these top-down mandates. Even before the Department of Education, LBJ was pushing ESEA Title I, Title II, Title III. Here comes the Department of Education and George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind, and then comes Common Core. They have taught anti-Americanism in our schools. We must get back to teaching God, to teaching country, and to teaching American exceptionalism. Because you see, what's happening in New York City is not just a shock that you've got a Muslim communist about to be elected the mayor of New York City. That in and of itself is a shock. The other part of the shock is you've got fools that are about to elect him. And that's because our educational institutions have failed us because we haven't had the guts to stand up and insist that exceptionalism and a belief in God have been in the schools. But a second failed institution with this Mondami election is not just education, it goes to immigration. Immigration. Trump ran on immigration, and the borders were open, wide open by the Democrats. And they poured people across the borders. And we lost more Americans in 1 year to fentanyl than in 10 years to the Vietnam War. Do y'all realize that? Fentanyl has been a weapon of mass destruction. The president has closed the border. As United States Senator, I will advocate for a new unified military command called United States Border Command. The United States military must remain involved in securing our borders. You can't go back to simply having the Border Patrol do it alone. I'll tell you some good news. In the 65 counties we've been in, we probably talked to a dozen sheriffs. Every sheriff that I've asked a question tells me that the fentanyl problem has dropped dramatically since we've had an effective commander-in-chief and a Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who's a friend of mine, by the way, get serious about shutting the border down. But you see, the Democrats exploited illegal immigration. But it isn't just illegal immigration that's been a problem. It's also the legal immigration scheme. What do I mean by that? Why is this Mondami dude even in the United States to begin with? He's only been here 7 years. Why is it that we have Muslim fools in Congress, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar? Why are they in Congress? Why are they even in the country? Let me tell you what happened. Because in 1965, again under LBJ, the Democrats claimed that our immigration system discriminated. Ladies and gentlemen, we can discriminate against foreigners all we want. Let me give you a little hint. But they changed the immigration system to bring in people from these Muslim countries. We have got to stop Sharia immigration into the United States. If you haven't heard of it, Sharia is the law of Islam, and it is against the United States Constitution. I just read the other day that there were 2 Muslim doctors in Michigan who performed genitalia surgery on little girls because that's what they do. We have got to stop immigrating people who are going to come in and try to kill us. Now, they'll call me a thisophobe or a thatophobe to say it, but it's got to be said. We've got to change the legal immigration system to best serve our American businesses and protect our Americans and stop being so freaking foolish. Finally, I want to touch on something that no, you're not going to hear Mike talk about this, not in this detail. You're not going to hear anybody else running as a Republican talking about this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when I entered this race in February, the national debt was in the upper 36 trillion range. It went through $37 trillion. And just last week, CBS reported, and I verified it, the national debt has now eclipsed $38 trillion. Some of you may be familiar with a website called usdebtclock.org. If not, you should check it out. You can see it running. The other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was headed up to speak in Buncombe County. I had the debt clock up. I pulled my little cell phone out. I'm getting close, Madam Chair. Set it for 1 minute. 1 minute. And it rolls at the end of a minute, I hear, you know, my daughter taught me how to do that. I got to, you know how these younger people to teach. But after 1 minute, anybody want to guess how much the debt had grown? Anybody want to take a whack? $2 million in 1 minute. Now, I want you to think about numbers. When people talk about numbers, I get all glazed over, but I want to do some things. Just think real hard. The national debt is currently exploding at a rate of $37,000 a second. Now, under the Democrats, it was exploding at $55,000 a second. So we have brought down the rate of the national debt. However, that's kind of like saying, you know, I used to be a really bad cocaine addict. I took 2 liters a night. Last night, I only snorted 1 liter of cocaine. The national debt continues to grow and explode. We have got to attack it as a Republican Party. And our Republican candidates have got to lead on this. And only the Congress can attack the budgetary matters of the United States because Congress has the power. What's going to happen if we don't get it under control? You are one of the most educated parties I've seen. You got an educated chair over here, and I can see the glint in your eye. You know world history. If you know world history, you know this, that every great power that ever controlled the face of the earth, from the Romans all the way up to the United States, had the dominant currency of the world. The Romans had, when you read your Bible, the denarius, 1 denarius, 2 denarii. The Dutch at one point controlled the world. They had the guilder. We just had Columbus Day. When Columbus discovered America, the Spanish had the peso. Everybody wanted it. The British then, they said the sun would never set on British soil, had the pound sterling, which surrendered to the dollar at Bretton Woods in 1944. And that's when the United States emerged as an economic superpower. We all cheered the president on when he sent those B-2 bombers to drop those bombs on Iran's nuclear site. The only reason we were able to do that, ladies and gentlemen, is because we are an economic superpower. Britain can't afford to do that. Britain fell like a rock when the pound sterling fell. A few years ago, I was in Belarus, the country just east of Russia, just north of Ukraine, with my church there. We were trying to get a kid out of Belarus whose brother and sister had been adopted at a Baptist church in Charlotte. We were trying to get the 3rd kid out so he would be reunited with his brother and sister and not across the ocean. Went over there and met with the Secretary of Education there. Belarus is a strict communist country run by a dictator named Alexander Lukashenko. We could not get him out. But during that period of time, I remember the 10 days we were there, we went into this outdoor mart, you know, kind of like a flea market. And there was like pictures there and clothing and scarves and all kinds of stuff. And I was going through the mart, and I used to be a chess player, but I like to collect chess sets. You know, some of them you can see Civil War chess sets, Revolutionary War. Well, there's a Russian chess set. And it looked really snazzy, and I wanted to buy it. So walking through the outdoor mart, I pulled out a $20 bill. You know what happened? Anyone want to guess what happened when I pulled that $20 bill out? Roger, it almost caused a riot. Why did it almost cause a riot? Because the rest of the world understands the power of the United States dollar, because it is the international currency of trade, which gives us an advantage over all other nations. We heard Willie and others talking about development. We got to develop here, develop there. We lose the dollar, these conversations will become academic. What's going to happen if we don't arrest the national debt? Well, it won't be like it was when the pound sterling fell to the dollar and another currency. It's not going to be the Chinese yuan. It's not going to be the euro dollar. It's not going to be the British pound sterling. I'm going to tell you where they're headed. And I'm going to tell you, there's a deliberate attempt to try to take the dollar down. There are 5 nations right now, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, all trying to take the dollar out. Even Saudi Arabia has been working against us with these petrodollars. I won't go into too much detail because of the time. But if they take the dollar out, they're going to replace it, now hear me now, with something called a central bank digital currency. You understand? This is where they are headed. And if we don't get serious about attacking the problem, it isn't enough to reduce it from 55,000 a second to 37,000 a second. By the way, that comes to $2.8 billion a day. $2.8 billion a day. It isn't enough to reduce the rate of the explosion of the debt. We must reverse the debt itself. The only way to do that is to take out the deep state. These agencies, unless they're constitutionally authorized, they must be eliminated. starting with the Department of Education, but I'll also fight to eliminate and end the Internal Revenue Service. It's got to go. And many other agencies as well have to go. But you've got to get serious about it, or we're simply prolonging the time. President Trump came in, and we are now living, ladies and gentlemen, in what I call the eye of a hurricane. Any ever been in the eye of a hurricane, you realize there's a surrealistic sense of peace. A surrealistic sense of peace. I was in the Caribbean a few years ago. Hurricane blows through, and it's rocking our cabin there by the water. We go out at 8 in the morning, and when the eye comes through, you see palm trees snapped like twigs. You see boats thrown here. You see mounds of sand. You see destruction around you, yet you feel a temporary sense of peace until the eye comes from the backside. The eye is coming back, ladies and gentlemen, and the Democrats are coming hard. The question is, will we as Republicans have the guts to take this deep state out? And when we start cutting their benefits, let me rephrase. When we start cutting the money we're giving them, which they're not constitutionally entitled to, it's like taking candy from a baby that's going to cry. They're going to look. The whole food stamp program needs to be out the window as far as I'm concerned. Okay, if the state of North Carolina wants to administer that, that's up to the state. But we've got to have the discipline to attack this deep state and to hit this financial crisis head on, or it won't matter. We are going to lose our dollar, and we won't have the luxury of wondering about whether we can get a. By the way, I love Waffle House. I mean, I go in there and get the the Fiesta omelet. I don't like the ham, but I do get extra crispy bacon. I'd love to have that too, but it won't matter. So I will propose and bring before the Senate what I call a Deep State Reduction Act. What does that mean? First of all, that will require a reduction of 2/3 of all federal employees over a period of 10 years. That can be done fairly easily because you retire most of them out. Okay? And all those savings will go to the national debt. Secondly, it will require reducing 2/3 of all agencies over a period of 10 years. If you cannot justify a federal agency by the United States Constitution, it's got to go. All that will be put against the national debt. We have to stop spending. We cannot tax ourselves. That's why Rand Paul wants to raise the Social Security tax to 25%. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot tax ourselves out of this problem. Dennis is a developer. If you tax corporations at 100%, we cannot tax ourselves out of this debt problem. The only way to do it is to cut. I'm willing to lead the charge for cutting, and I'm going to say I don't have some fancy strategist telling me what to say. I'm not going to tell you what I think I need to tell you to get elected, but I'm running because I have kids and grandkids, and I can see the end if we don't get serious about this. Don Brown would appreciate your support for the United States Senate. We have Julie here has some palm cards. You can find me at brown4nc.com. And we appreciate your support. And throw in $10. We'd appreciate that too, or more. Some of y'all can throw it a little more. But we need your support. And do not let somebody else tell you how to vote, okay? We have to think. And we're thinking here this morning together. Love you all. God bless you. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. And should I take questions or just do this later? I can send them. Chair says we have time for a couple of questions. And if we do have to break, we're headed to Iredell County and then to somewhere down east. But we'll be around as long as somebody wants to talk to us. Do you have any questions? Okay. All right. Yes, sir. Far corner.
I've been digging into the history of the state for probably 15 years. I've got a really good newsletter. Been on various codes. And I did see one good last newsletter.
Vincent, do you have a question?
My point is, you have no civil defense. You've already built up Russia and China. They're nuclear